So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions. Now, I know that it's a rather large audience. Is there another mic for them and someone who can run, or do you just need to shout out? Okay, we'll just shout out because apparently there's no other mic and I can't pass this one around. So if you speak loud enough for me to hear you, I will then repeat the question so everyone can hear it and also it can be heard to the webinar listeners. Yes, sir.
Okay, so first off, I just want to say that something that has not been said in all the webinars that I've seen, but from the people, at least for me, we love you, Dr. Greer.
Well, thank you. Well, I love you too. So, yeah. You're lovely, beautiful.
Anyways, so how can we, the people, help you in your efforts to get the free energy devices, 0-point energy, all this stuff, faster in a production? I know you're working with the companies that you said, but what can we do? Obviously, we're not there with you. What can we do to help expedite?
That's a great question. What can we do? What can the people do to help expedite the bringing forth of these earth-saving technologies? First, let me clarify. There are people who have operational systems today, all of them that I know of, every single one of them, are in either corporate or intellectual property tie-ups that guarantee they will not benefit humanity. So they have made every strategic error possible. If you want to look at, there's a 4-hour webinar and thing I did on new energy and transdimensional physics. It's up on our youtube.com/𝗕disclosure site, but also on Vimeo, our Vimeo site where you can see it, the whole 4-hour uninterrupted, where I go into this in granular detail. So I recommend that to people. But quickly, what I'm at this stage attempting to do is to advise a number of venture capital and other folks how to put together a multi-centered R&D program so that within a year or two, we would have multiple versions of these devices. Some would allow conventional technologies like the internal combustion engine to run on water. Others, that's transitional, because it takes 15 years to replace all the motors in the world. Others would be 0-point energy that hopefully would be solid state. And the one that we're leaving off of the plan right now is the anti-gravity, things that fly. At the current time, the good news is that every few months I learn of another scientist or group that has an operational system. The very bad news, that's heartbreaking, and this will disturb you, is that in every single case they have already made fatal strategic errors, because naively they think if we have a technology, we can bring it out, as I was saying earlier, like you do another app or smartphone. And for that reason, they are in the box, and they're in a box where they are already caught in the trap, the net. And it means that there's no zero probability they will get out to benefit the human race, because if they want to go the patent route, it's going to be seized. If you divide it into 1,000 patents, the intelligence community already knows you're doing that, and it's still going to be seized. If you go to trade secrecy route, it's going to have a national security order on it. If you get involved with entities that are corporate entities that don't understand what they're up against, they're going to end up, if their primary interest is money, they're going to get bought out and it'll be black shelf. Like Tuwari in India just made this deal with an industrial concern in India, and it's a legitimate over-unity system. I would say it's almost certainly dead at this point. 𝗏𝗏𝗏, who has the ECAT system and the LENR technology, a friend of mine connected to the National Security Agency, they've had a beat on him for a very long time, and I was told about 3 years ago that there would be no chance he'd go forward. A multi-billionaire who just met with him on Saturday said, yes, he's out of pocket. It can't go out. Now, there's a whole, I mean, I would have to spend another 4 hours going through the reasons for the strategic plan that I have. And a key part of the strategic plan that I have is that all of you become stakeholders, not financially necessarily, but stakeholders in terms of networking, so that if we open up, or if someone hands off to me a system that's operational, the first thing we will do is A, see that it's reproducible and legitimate, and disclose it massively. So when we did the disclosure project, you know, upwards of 800 million people around the world eventually heard about it. But that was before the internet had the capacities it does now. With social media, live streaming, all this stuff, this would be the biggest press conference in the world. There would be no secrecy around it from the minute we know it's legitimate. Now, unfortunately, the vast majority of the things we've investigated are actually frauds and tricks. And we lost around $1 million going around the world, going down rabbit holes of tricksters. And I think that that's one of the real problems, is all the tricksters. So we have to, we know exactly what that was, a very steep learning curve, and you don't do this for 25 years and learn nothing. However, I also know that it can be done, and it can be done relatively quickly, because I have a computer disk that has hundreds of seized patents that a guy in the CIA had a man allowed to copy, and that is on a computer disk, and I have it. Now that's a two-dimensional on disk, but so you have to have a laboratory do this. My goal is to have a if we could do this properly, there would be a multi-centered effort where, like the software development group, GitHub, where trying to fix a coding problem, people from many places jump in, and they're sharing information and solutions in real time, open and source, totally open source. No intellectual property. So you have a few scientific research teams, decentralized, all working on this, but sharing in real time the breakthroughs they have, and you're going to collapse time frames. So instead of having the redundancy of everyone trying to recreate the wheel, everyone's benefiting from the iterative process of research and development. At the same time, this would be live streamed, maximum capacity, and it would be announced to the public, and major PR campaign, so that millions of eyeballs are watching in that lab and seeing the data reporting out in real time. And therefore, you've created a strategic security around the inevitable search and seizure that happens around these devices, not just the United States, but anywhere in the world that gets seized. The other part of this strategy, therefore, is a key part of it are the people getting invested, not with money necessarily, although that doesn't hurt. I mean, I wish we had the funds, right? We don't yet. But also being invested in what they know and telling everyone this is happening. Because you can't count on the lamestream media or CNN to carry this. I have seen too many big stories that I've been part of killed by the major networks in Hollywood and the big media, because they are very corrupt. And in this case, luckily, if you do it's strategy that involves bypassing these chokeholds in information and news. Look, I mean, I just did something not long ago about the deep national security state. It's had millions of views on YouTube. I mean, CNN would kill to get those numbers for a lot of their shows. So we don't need that. We have this alternative new media that didn't exist 10 years ago. Facebook didn't, Twitter didn't, being able to live stream at those kind of numbers didn't. When we did the National Press Club event 15 years ago in May, we used up every T1 line in the city of Washington, and they were overloaded. Now you don't have that problem. The capacity is infinitely more. Therefore, let's take this technology that it has developed, utilize it to frustrate the strategic nexus of search, seizure, and suppression. And it creates not only an enormous security around everyone working on it. The security is because these vampires who work in these dark covert programs don't want to be caught in a 1 billion watt searchlight grabbing a technology in real time. They don't. That's one of the reasons I'm not dead. In 1991, I met with an attorney who worked with this group, Magic Majestic, and he said, whatever you do, don't do what you're doing secretively or quietly, or you're a dead man. And I took his advice. That's why I went on Larry King Live and all those shows. I think this is a counterintuitive, because in the world of technology, science development, the name of the game is this golem holding. And what people can do out who are listening, number one, spread the word, network. Number two, get educated on it. If you haven't seen that 4-hour seminar I did on transdimensional physics, look at it, study it. If you know of someone who's an inventor or scientist who has an operational device sitting in their garage or their laboratory, but they're afraid of going forward with it, hook them up with me and have them hand it off. It needs to be handed off openly, quickly, transparently. All of you need to be scouts for this. And if you know people who are high net worth, who can contribute to a fund to support this, they should contact me as soon as possible, because we want to set up a meeting, like a Jekyll Island meeting, a meeting that would where we'd put these elements together and go forward very quickly. So that networking needs to happen. So those are things that are immediate things you can do, and also we need each of you to be talent scouts. For if we're able to do this in the next few months, we're going to need a lot of talent, top drawer scientists, project management, everything else, and we're going to need to raid some really talented people. And I'm not talking, I mean, it has to be at the, I hate to say it, at the ER doctor level of professional, boom, you know, like hardcore professionals. And we need those people. And so talent, I was talking to a gentleman in Orange County day before yesterday, and he said one of the big problems with what they're doing is talent, getting people who can actually manage this. Finding scientists who can get up to speed on this new physics. And it is a hard area of science, but they've all been miseducated by, you know, electrodynamics and electromechanical and in the EEs. Any people going through the traditional physics and traditional electronics would have to go through a crash course of this new type of energy. And there's a lot of legitimate science, and it can be done very quickly. But we need to find people who would do that, who are willing to go the distance. The fear factor that keeps people from going forward is neutralized by you and we, the people. Remember, I'm not saying this out of speculation. We did the largest disclosure event in history. Virtually every single person I was working with on that who came forward had top secret clearances or had signed national security oaths. Not a one of them to this day have been threatened, harmed, or silenced. Why? Because we had this strategic security in place. Not all of which I'm discussing, but it's there. So forget the fear and forget the intimidation factor, and we need to make a run at this. We need to do it. The other thing everyone can do is put this in consciousness and in prayer and protection, and for our protection, because it's very powerful. We need people doing that. That's something everybody can do. So those are a few things. Yes, ma'am.
Some of the stuff that you're talking about with the physics and everything is really, really complex. So do you have anything out there that is helpful for those of us who are more laymen?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a meditation disc or something that makes it a little bit easier for us to start practicing it more regularly and to bring ourselves up to speed more naturally?
Are you asking about the energy technology or the meditation techniques?
Meditation techniques.
Okay. Those, yes, on our website, SeriousDisclosure.com, there are meditation CDs. There's a whole training kit for CE5 contact groups. There's the app I mentioned that actually has the entire meditation and the remote viewing protocols and coherent thought sequencing protocols and the electronic tones that we send out. All that's on an app that's $6.99. So all that is there, SiriusDisclosure.com. So there's a huge amount of available information, yes. Also, there are links from that site to the Orion project on the physics end of it that allow people to study all the history and reports that are scientific. And I mean, if you drill down to all the links, it goes into hundreds, thousands of pages. And, you know, that's there. So, yes, there are. Yes, sir.
Doctor, would you be comfortable sharing with us some of the meanings of the words of the mantra that we learned last night?
The mantra is really one word, in a sense. It's 3 syllables. And it means I give myself to the unbounded self, the unbounded being. It literally means that. A literalistic translation would be where I bow down before the great and unbounded mind and consciousness. But what it really means is I, the individual, and this is what true humility is, by the way, I am willing to let my drop become the ocean and to give up one's, and allow that to be what we are. Yes. And that's literally what it means in Sanskrit, the mantra. Yes, sir.
Dr. Greer, I've been noticing how resonance and vibration is crucial in a lot of things.
Mhm.
Comes back up a lot. So sound seems to have quite an effect on healing and just interacting with matter and in subatomic worlds and material worlds and whatnot. Is it possible, I've heard about like the tuning of the instrumentation that we use today for music, how it is possibly not resonating the unison with the environment, and how that might cripple consciousness and several states that we have inside of us. I mean, do you know anything about this?
Well, sure. I mean, he's asking about the resonant frequencies of music and how it needs to be tuned or can be tuned to be enlivening the consciousness. And there's a whole school of thought. There's a whole area of Vedic knowledge that deals with music and tonality. Now, everyone has a different taste in music. But it is true that over the course of human development and history, the thing that is most elemental is sound, music, chanting. This is why in every culture, chanting, music, the ringing of bowls, the beating of drums, these resonant frequencies are very much part of the experience that people have that awaken and help center in sort of a meditative way. Now, I mean, you can also just enjoy because it's fun, you know, 9 Inch Nails or whoever. And, you know, but they're different, but there's music for different purposes. So what you're asking about is music and tonality that's awakened. And I think that there's an infinite array of music and tones and instruments that can be used, and it's just very intuitive. I mean, you talk to people who are masters of sitar, Ravi Shankar, and it is truly a spiritual state, and the tones and what have you. Same thing with much of the beautiful music in ancient Japan or Native American, and that is true, and the reason it's effective is the mantra is a sound. And the first emanation, if you study the Vedas, from the unbounded field of pure consciousness, the first emanation into relativity, in the structure of the cosmos, isn't light or form, it's the tonality. It's that primal sound thought. And that then, from the sound, the form emerges that is transdimensional, astral, and then matter. So within the saw, if you look at every single person in this room, every star in the galaxy, everything that exists, every grain of sand, that individual discrete thing has a resonant tone within it. And this can be directly experienced. In fact, when I had this on the third full moon of 1990, when I was asked to form this project, if you read the book Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, it goes through all of what happened each month. But on the third one, when I had this spacecraft in the front of this big estate I had in North Carolina near the Biltmore House up in Nashville, North Carolina, there was a experience where I went out in our solar system and I saw the moon, and actually I saw these massive objects near the dark side, between the dark and light side of the moon, hovering there, massive. And of course, we've recently gotten intelligence that there are there. And then I went out into our solar system, and I was actually in a state of consciousness with these very advanced ETs that are at the level where they operate from. They're physical, and they have physical spacecraft, but they're incredibly transdimensional. But their technologies emanate from the level of God consciousness, the level of the celestial. And even their spacecraft are like meeting a divine avatar. I mean, it's hard to describe. This is very, very abstract. But anyway, so I was out in space in our solar system, and I went into this deep meditative state and went into samadhi and then into this unity consciousness state where I could see everything was consciousness. And as I turned to the earth, I was introduced to the earth as a female actual being, a conscious being, not human, but a planetary consciousness. And she's female, absolutely. Mars is male, was introduced to him. Venus is female. Mercury is gay, or he's sort of androgynous, he's sort of both. He is. And then Saturn was female. Jupiter was male. And so it went. And I could actually interact with the consciousness and was introduced to them. And it was beautiful. I mean, it was amazing. And then I went into a state where I heard, as each planet was spinning in our solar system, a pure note. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Now this sounds really corny and cliche. The music of the spheres. It is real. And I actually perceived it, directly perceived it. And I went, oh, this is beautiful. I mean, I wish I was a musician. I can't recreate that. I don't know if anyone could. And I could hear the resonant frequency tone that was giving rise to the light, the astral transdimensional light body of these planetary beings, which were planets, that were then creating matter in space-time. So it went from unbounded consciousness through this tonality of tone into the formation of the light body, the astral body of the planet, like you have an astral body, to the physical planet. And I could perceive all of it, tracking it all the way back to source. And as I began to hear each one, they then started blending together in sort of a symphony or harmonic. And then I became aware of the sun and the other stars and planets, and I went in an instant where I heard the pure tonality of everything that is in creation that then merged into one perfect primal tone emanating from infinity. And with that, I transcended into that Brahman consciousness where you are one with the entire cosmos and creation and also with unbounded mind. It was one of the most beautiful years went by before I could talk about this experience without crying. It's so beautiful. And then, of course, I realized that's all folded within each and every one of us, and every point in space and time has the reality of what I just described folded within it. See, there's so much to explore if you understand who you are. It's beautiful. And so, how did I get off on that? Oh, about music. I'm sorry. So yes, music tonality is very key and is very activating in consciousness. And that's why sacred music, all of that is very important. Yes, sir.
Pythagoras apparently was the first one to hear the sound of the sphere.
Well, I doubt he was the first one, but yes.
People around him,
Yeah.
he did great healing, allegedly, with the strings. He's very articulate about the string instruments. They have the most effective
If I can ask people to ask a question, because no one can hear your dissertation. Yeah. Yeah.
I make an instrument that has 25 strings, Pythagoras, all tuned to the same note.
Okay.
And so your perfect fifth and all those are part of the way nature dissipates that. Have you ever heard an instrument and had the conscious, what it does to you? Have you ever heard a monochord? Several people have them.
I have not heard the instrument you've made. No, I haven't heard that device. But I'd love to hear it. If you have you can play it this evening when we come up. Yeah, briefly. Yes, but it's very real. I understand what this is about, and it is sacred tonality that also leads to sacred geometry and forms. And then the constructs of consciousness, all of that is residing. And it enlivens the consciousness to hear it or even see it. That's why mandalas work. Crop circles, at their deepest meaning, are like an activation in consciousness of the forms. And that's what the ones that aren't faked. They're actually archetype forms that enliven awareness on a deep level. And they're made, anyway, we can get into, I know exactly how they're made in terms of the technology that's being used to make them. It's quite fascinating. I'll give you a hint. If anti-gravity is causing something to become lighter so it can levitate and float, you can take that same technology and make something heavier and augment or increase the gravitational wave field within a certain pattern and pull the crops down and make a pattern. That's what it is. Everybody follow that? Yeah, so I know exactly how they're doing it. Yes, ma'am.
Yesterday you were talking about the origins of Sanskrit, the language, and you mentioned that there were ancient civilizations that were in open communication with ET civilizations.
Yes.
But now we're not. And so what happened between then and now? Why did we move backwards?
She's asking about what has happened in the various cycles of Earth history, where at one time a civilization quite enlightened, like the era of the so-called Shambhala Kingdom, an area of a golden age that existed, where clearly there was enlightenment and also contact with ET civilizations. How did that happen and then have it fall into the darkness of ignorance again? This is an interesting phenomenon because it has to do with regional and local cycles on Earth as opposed to global cycles. So in the development of Earth over the millions of years, the Earth is, 4 billion years old or so. Life on Earth's been around for 700 million years, so they say probably longer. It gives a very long time for a lot to have happened. And our recorded history only goes back a few thousand years. So there have been civilizations on Earth more developed and advanced than we are now, for which we have no record. Many of them ended up getting to a certain point and then self-destructing, and all record would be lost. There was one that was in the area of northern India and Tibet and the so-called Shambhala Kingdom, and were the origins of Sanskrit and the Vedas, that was very enlightened and had the knowledge of the science of consciousness and many other technologies. However, there were other areas of the earth not as enlightened, and it then fell into warfare and darkness and disappeared again. And we're talking hundreds of thousands of years ago. By the way, there's a man that I've worked with who does a lot of work for the CIA and the Marines under contract from 𝗖𝗃𝟱 𝗃𝗃. And when the military or intelligence community finds a very ancient, I mean thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of year old device, they take it to him to figure out what it was used for. Some of them are actually ancient Earth civilization remnants. Some of them are interstellar extraterrestrial. And people have to understand both exist. The distinction between the time we're in now and the time that we're talking about, the era in the past was a cycle, about 450,000 years. They call them a yuga, a big giant cycle, and Kali Yuga is what's closing. There's another yuga or cycle opening that's about 500,000 years. We are the children of the transition, the closing of one cycle, the opening of another. But you're talking about in a 1,000,000-year total for 450 plus 500,000, it's about 1,000,000 years. And we have to have that perspective that what we're doing is, in a sense, trying to create and guide our global civilization into a path that is peaceful and interglobal, interplanetary. And that is something that has not been achieved before in the past, in at least the last 400 and some thousand years. Now, whether it happened millions of years ago is open to debate. I mean, there are reports of entire continents, Lemuria, Mu, Atlantis, that have just vanished. They may go back many millions of years in other cycles where perhaps beings evolved on Earth that then became interstellar and are gone. Does this make sense? And I think that is the case. In fact, we've had experiences with that. Now remember that that's where we're headed. That in a few 100,000 years, we're not going to look anything like we do now. And we will have evolved into an interstellar species that are ETs to other worlds. So, you understand what I mean? And even morphogenic field genetics, epigenetic release, contact will result in us being very different in appearance than we are right now over the next several 100,000 years. And I want to tell you a story because it's not understood well. Everybody's heard of the RAF Bentwaters Rendlesham Forest event, I think it was in '81, where this pyramid-shaped craft came down and landed, if you know the Disclosure Project witnesses, and there are many others who've come forward. What most people don't realize is that that event, which was a series of events that happened, came about that when the big contact event happened with the officers there, and this was a nuclear-armed facility that was a covert one. It was not a part of any of the agreements and treaties, and it was a secret nuclear base. And had it been known that it was there, it could have precipitated World War III or maybe rioting in the United Kingdom at the time. And so this ET craft, interstellar craft, came down, hit some limbs. It actually left physical traces that the Ministry of Defense has released after the Disclosure Project in the United Kingdom, and a number of witnesses who came forward. What wasn't said, and what only a couple of people who were right up by the craft have said, but they don't want to talk about it publicly for fear of ridicule. See, ridicule is the thing that's kept all this from coming out because people don't want to be laughed at. And the truer it is, the stranger it is. But the stranger it is, the more likely it is people are going to think you've lost your mind. All right? And it creates its own hermetically sealed, self-correcting system. But the truth is that when that event happened, there were some beings that were luminous, light-like beings. They came out of this black, it was like onyx, like glass, pyramid, a perfect pyramid that landed. And it came out, and these ETs said to these officers, these U.S. Air Force officers who were right there, and they said, "We are your descendants from 500,000 years in the future. But if you stay on the course you're on, we may not exist. Because if you destroy yourselves, we can't be." So it was, people asked me, were they human? Or I said, well, they were the descendants of humans, but they were a very different species in the sense, or in a developed species, but from 500,000 years, which is at the end of this particular yuga. And that's what actually happened at RAF Bentwaters Air Force Base in England. So that's shocking. It sounds like something from, you know, a science fiction film to many people, but it makes complete sense. And this is why I tell people we have an enormous moral responsibility to not just the world and the people now. We're so self-centered and narcissistic. There are 20,000 generations, 500,000 years worth of intelligent life and beings who are ready to come to this planet to evolve, that are waiting for us to get this right. That's how important this time is. We have to get it right. And this is why, you know, when you step into this, if you do it in the wrong way, you're taken off the stage. If you're doing it with enlightened knowledge, somehow it's like Luke Skywalker. You just keep missing the bullet. And kind of, you know, I've sort of missed the bullet for 25 years. I don't take anything for granted. But it's because it isn't about me or anyone else I'm working with. It's about this purpose that is that humanity is to be eventually interplanetary, where we then spread enlightenment and knowledge, and we bring the equivalent of the Vedas and all this information to emerging worlds that are coming along behind us. And it's an endless cycle of development that goes on throughout the entire cosmos. One other thing, consciousness is absolutely non-local. And therefore, like the old saying, as above, so below, or as below, so above. What we do on this planet, like when we started detonating atomic bombs, that opened the modern era in, quote, UFO events, because a hornet's nest of deep concern, went up. A red flag went over this planet because we had reached the point where we could destroy all life on Earth, but also could become an existential threat to innocent planets out there. There are planets that are very much more developed than we are that has no concept of war and has no weaponry, because they didn't evolve or descend from a lineage of primates and chimps where there is this tribalistic murder impulse. They descended from the equivalent of, say, cetaceans or some other species. You see what I'm saying? So everyone's so worried about the ETs. I said, no, they're worried about us. I flip it right around. It's like it's the man in the mirror. You need to look in the mirror. Step out of the narcissistic, self-absorbed, human, anthropocentric reality. Look at this planet and the human race through the eyes of these other civilizations. Well, you cannot blame them for being shocked and appalled. And it's because we have stayed on a path of conflict, separation, and warfare for 100 years longer than we should have. And we don't have muskets and machine guns. We have weapons of mass destruction that could end all life on this planet. We have scalar technologies that can be a threat because it's faster than the speed of light, scalar, that is an existential threat to other planets. And you have to understand that it is within this milieu that we're operating as diplomatic teams to these civilizations. And this then speaks to something else very critical. For us to establish this new Shambhala Kingdom that's a global and interplanetary civilization, we have to make it through this transition period and need people to help guide and protect us as we do so. There are ETs doing it, there are humans doing it, and we need the masses to see it and actuate it, manifest it. But in the meanwhile, you have to walk the mystical path with practical feet. You want to go out and make contact, but you have to understand the reason the ETs are going to, the least likely way an actual extraterrestrial civilization is going to interact is in 3D because of the risk matrix. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're dealing with a Lockheed man-made UFO that have these man-made kind of cloned robotic things that people think are ETs, they call them aliens, those are very 3D, but they're 100% run by covert military intelligence and corporate programs, which is what the stock and trade of ufology is all about, and the disinformation nexus. There's abductions, mutilations, graves, this and that. The actual interstellars, ETs, this is another reality. And it gets confused and conflated deliberately for people who want us to hate everything that's ET, because that's how we get into a next war, interplanetary war. In the meanwhile, when we're going out under the stars and doing this, since 1965, we have had platforms in space that have targeted ETcraft. But in those 50 years, 51 years, there has been an enormous increase in the accuracy and the lethality of them. I think it was in the 1970s, a man that I met, and actually one of my military advisors was on the board of directors of his electronic company, had invented what are called neutrino light detectors. And what basically these do is that if you're coming in from subspace, a transdimensional space-time, into this dimension, and you're not materialized, but you're in the process of stepping in, it can happen very instantly. It can go from here to invisible to the naked eye, or even to most sensors, to fully visible. But at that interface between dimensions, as you emerge into 3D, there is a burst of energy that's called neutrino light. So this guy had invented very sensitive sensors. The National Security Agency came in and seized them under a national security order, and then they ended up on the National Reconnaissance Office, NRO satellites. So that when an ET craft, it can be under the Earth, it can be above the Earth, it can be in outer space, when it goes out of its resonance field that is in another dimension into 3D, that is picked up instantly in real time. Every major fully materialized craft that has appeared at a CE5 has rapidly had jets, helicopters, and sometimes ground forces that are tracking what I'm doing move in. And I don't say this to discourage you from doing it. It's simply to say, I'm wanting to be honest about the complexity of the theater of operation known as planet Earth that we live in. Therefore, tonight you're going to understand why I'm going to go through a bunch of images that look like artwork, some of them. They look abstract, and it's actually ET manifestations that are at a level that can't be suppressed and have no danger to them or us when they interact with us. You've got to learn this. Get out of the childish idea that the only way these civilizations can interact is if it's a movie like Close and the mothership lands and they come and you shake hands. Okay, so you're childish kindergartners. If that is the least likely way it's going to happen at this time. Now this is going to change, but at this point in time, we've actually, from when I started the project to now, 25 years, there has been an increase in the threat matrix from classified projects being able to create this net around the Earth. And it's not just U.S. airspace. This is anywhere in the world where it is a threat. One of the Disclosure Project witnesses was on the Peruvian-Bolivian border, if you read his account in the Disclosure book. I know nobody reads anymore. But if you read it, or you can see it on BoobTube, YouTube, I'm sorry. It's so sad to me no one reads. But what happened is that we, under the cover of an astronomy station up on in the Andes, the U.S. military had a radar system and a space-based system that would track these ET craft, and they hit one that crashed near the Peruvian-Bolivian border. And this Marine guy was one of the first people to get there. He was threatened with death if he ever spoke about it. It's all in our material. And and this was, I think, happened in the 80s or 90s. It wasn't all that long ago. I think early 90s. I have to look up the date. But, you know, you imagine technology doesn't stand still. Trillions of dollars spent on research and development by these psychopaths results in increasing generation after generation of generation. So when we go out, we have to understand that it may be that these interstellar civilizations will want to contact you purely in consciousness, or with non-fully materialized manifestations, or with electronic communication through devices like we had earlier, or a million other ways. That's what we're going to go through tonight. It's going to blow your mind when you see and hear this stuff. Or they may in fact fully materialize. Now one time we were, since we're at near Joshua Tree, we were in Joshua Tree, and one of these objects materialized right over us. And maybe it was a burst of, we were out in the middle of 800,000 acres, and this object materialized and came in a flash of blinding white light. So bright, and maybe about 10 feet above the group. So bright that everyone with their eyes closed could see the veins in their eyelid. And I had my eyes open, because I can meditate with eyes open. And it was this beautiful, and then right after that, coming up out of the plain east of that site on Geology Tour Road, go there if you want, came this spherical ET craft that materialized and drifted towards us and was coming, and everyone looking that way, looking east, saw it. And then it vanished. Within a few seconds, a very low altitude, looked like a 747, very large jet at stall speed, came in over a national park illegally. And it was loaded with little green probes and antenna on it, came in with landing lights on, right, and strafed the group looking for this thing. So it was actually up in the air. Now, here's the thing. I'm the director of this project globally, interplanetarily, actually. So I'm a high-value target. You're not. And the reason I tell people you guys have so much more opportunity to do things I can't do is because I don't have any way to, I've lost the ability to be off the radar. So in a way, coming out with me is wonderful, but what you can do on your own is get rid of the old doctor and do it on yourself, because I'm actually, in that sense, a liability. And people who have been with me on these expeditions, they hear this, they think it has to be something out of an X-Files episode. By the way, the premiere of that totally stole all my work. I didn't see it, but I heard about it. But I don't care. Imitation is the greatest form of flattery. But what happens is that when you do this on your own without someone who's a high-profile character like me, these folks have assets, but their assets aren't infinite. The covert programs. And so the reason I'm pushing this out to more and more people is that they might be able to keep a bead on me, but they can't do that to every person. They don't have infinite numbers of personnel and assets. So I invite you to come out with me, but I give this warning, but I encourage you to do it on your own, because really you don't know how lucky you are not to be me. I mean that. I'm not trying to, it's no false humility on my part when I say that. Believe me when I tell you, I feel that. Yeah. 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 Well, yeah, we're never alone. But it's beautiful, and so they're always with us. So just keep that in mind. And I know I've gone off on some tangents from what you asked, but I wanted to give the perspective of this multi-cyclical, multi-million-year process. Now, my big concern isn't millions of years ago or millions of years from now. My concern is really the next 500,000 years. That's what my focus is. Well, I mean, you have to be right now, but the vision, the strategy and the knowledge that I'm trying to put out is for the next 500,000 years. And the transdimensional interstellars that have a very big interest in seeing Earth, human civilization develop, who are the primogenitors of life on Earth, have our backs and are with us all the time. So have no fear and do the right thing. It's beautiful. Maybe one more question. Yes, ma'am?
Okay. As I understand it, there's parallel realities, and our consciousness creates the realities that we're in, right? At least that was physics a couple years ago. And I'm wondering, as our movement here creates momentum and as it's showing up in the meme of the culture with the movies and everything, is there ever the possibility that we're going to spin off into the good world and we're going to leave all those bad guys in another world and they can have their Armageddon and all of that, and we're going to go with you?
Well, yes. Perhaps. I actually, this question, she's asking, could it be that we have a parallel, several possibilities going on where we could spin off into this new future and the nut jobs in the insane asylum called Earth just blow each other up. Anything's possible. You talk about probable futures. However, and that is a possibility that we could go to the point of no return. That's like when Tom Bearden said, "And don't get me wrong, the fools may blow it yet." And so the tipping point of that is when we become either too great a burden on Earth that it becomes not a recoverable level of ecosystem collapse, or we go to DEFCON 1 and a big war that ends all life on Earth, or we cross this unacknowledged red line in space where we become an existential threat to other star systems, And for our requirement to make this happen in a way that's life-affirming and positive for the future, we just have to have enough people who have both the knowledge and this courage to manifest it and this mass field of consciousness that then translates to action. So it does some good if you just sit and meditate, but you need to also go from the meditative state into action that's effective. And that's where most people drop the ball, because it's easy to take the intellectual and spiritual bypass and to just being in the headspace and not doing anything in the world. But we live on Earth, and so we need to be compassionate to Gaia and our fellow humans by taking very direct and specific actions to fix this. Now, you could have a defeatist view and just say, well, let the whole thing go to hell in a handbasket. We're all going to die anyway, and we go to the next world. But that's a really wrong way of looking at it. The way I look at it is that Earth is actually precious. Human life is precious. And the development of higher states of consciousness in this Earth and on this plane is quickened because of the nature of physical reality providing the impetus, the point-counterpoint to the beauty and ease of just the astral field. And the reason you can evolve 1 million years in one lifetime on Earth is because of the intensity of the experience here. So in a sense, I call this Schoolhouse Earth. And Schoolhouse Earth gives us the impetus to achieve great things and within our soul and mind, that if we were just in the repose and comfort and beauty of a non-material existence, might take millions of years. So the whole material cosmos is sort of a launch pad for all intelligent life quickening into these other dimensions. Now you can choose that path, or you can choose another one that's lower, but that's really the highest purpose. And that's why I tell people life on Earth is precious and beautiful, and humanity is precious and beautiful. And these interstellar civilizations appreciate that. They also appreciate that we can be very destructive. And so we have to get control of ourselves, and we have to have good people who vow to put together the foundations, both in consciousness and knowledge and technology, for a civilization that's just and peaceful and enlightened. And that's really, I feel, why all of us are here today. Thank you very much. God bless you.